Hello, and welcome to 52 Weeks of Health Equity with Conscious by Us. I'm your host, Tahisha. Imagine a world where everyone has equal access to healthcare and resources for a healthier life and wellness. What would that look like? At Conscious by Us, we believe health impacts all aspects of our lives, especially as we progress towards creating a diverse and inclusive world where everyone feels they belong. With that in mind, I set out to have about 52 conversations about health equity with a variety of guests across a multitude of areas, industries, and subjects to see what they thought. On today's episode, I have the privilege of chatting with the incredibly talented author, director, and conflict resolution facilitator, Matthew Solomon. Matthew, I would love if you could just give us an intro about yourself for our listeners because I love you. I love everything you sent, but let's have them love you too.
All right. Thank you so much, Deesh. It's really great to be here. And I'm looking forward to having this conversation. It's something I'm very passionate about, health and well being. I'll try and keep it brief because, actually, how I got here is like, took my whole life. But it's basically, born and raised in LA, I was in the entertainment business most of my life. I was a professional musician. And then I found myself writing and directing films and feature films, short films, and web content. And along the way, I've always been passionate about personal development, relationships, professional development. So I was always taking seminars and workshops and reading books on how to be a better human. And then along the way, I got trained to coach people in communication and relationships and being able to accomplish the things that they wanted to accomplish in their lives. And so I went into coaching, and I've always had uh, a, I guess, an awareness of social justice and social issues, and been fascinated with the things that make communities work and societies work. And so that then translated into I started doing conflict resolution work, especially after the online Me Too movement. When that started, I wrote a book to help men understand what was going on. It's called Man School, Relating with Women in the Me Too Era. And I was writing articles about race issues, sexism, communication and relationships for the Good Men Project, which is an online publication. And out of that, I was invited to different organizations to help them deal with various aspects of conflict on college campuses and corporations. And so I've kind of been in and around all of this, and it all intersected once the pandemic started and we couldn't go anywhere and I couldn't travel, to do my work. I ended up going back to school, and I was working towards a master's in public administration, figuring I was done with film, thinking I'm going into politics and government and something where I could use my privilege and access as a white male to help further positive social change. And through that course, I was applying the course topics on sustainability and communities and transformative leadership to the issues that were happening post George Floyd, with the issues of policing and incarceration. And it became really clear that those systems actually are related to mental health issues. They're detrimental in a lot of ways, especially with Black and Brown communities and impoverished communities, where it has a very negative impact on mental health, on well-being. We talk about equity, like all of that. And so I was like, okay, I know this system isn't working, so what do we replace it with? And so that became the area of my focus. Like, if we don't call the cops, what do we do? And it took me down into abolition and restorative justice and communities of care. And when people have their needs met, housing, jobs, all of that, then people are healthier, happier, and able to live better. And so I ended up, instead of writing a paper for my final thesis, doing a documentary called Reimagining Safety, where I interviewed 10 experts from a variety of different angles. And, uh, and so the thesis of the film is basically, this doesn't work. This is why we think it's supposed to work and it doesn't. But then here are the alternatives. And so through that film, which I know we'll get into a little more, it really became clear that if we really cared about one another, like for real, we would do things differently. And that translates to empathy and compassion and all the things I was doing in conflict resolution, applied to our, like, how we approach punishment instead of rehabilitation, and that sort of thing. So that's how I got here. And it's like on the surface, it looks like, oh, he was in music, he was in film, he did this, but
Just a jack of all trades.
yeah, but when people step back, it's like, oh, it all makes sense. Like the journey, it wasn't planned. It's just all of my passions and interests kind of took me down this road. And if it wasn't for my music and film career, I wouldn't have made the film. I wouldn't have worked with the people that I worked with, and I wouldn't have, if I didn't grow up in LA and go to John Burroughs Junior High School and Fairfax High School, I wouldn't have the friends that I did that expanded my worldview outside of being like a white male in, West Hollywood.
And I love your introduction because it really speaks to when we lean into our strengths and then share our ability to help others, we can think about, well, what's the problem we're trying to fix? And what can I bring to that space? And how can I help? And I think that's such a great example because you mentioned, hey, I thought I was going to go into this whole different area. And I realized I'm sitting in this place of privilege and strength right now. I might be able to do something immediately to get this message and concept out there. And it is so important for the public to start thinking about, well, what does it look like if we care about each other? Because we say we care, but are we really doing that? And what would it look like to care? So that's really what drove me or kind of got me interested in the work you were doing because it makes sense. Just like you said, it's not working what we're doing. So, but what do we do? What do we
Mhm.
do if this doesn't work? So,
Yeah.
I love that idea. And I love that you put what drew you into the work, your passion to be more of an ally and an active ally, almost like an accomplice. You're ready to go down. Your name is attached to that
Yeah.
film, right?
Yeah.
So, but why is this important though? Why are communities and building up communities, in your mind, important to getting us to a different place when it comes to our health and our wellness, especially mental health?
Yeah, well, I think, well, a big part of it is, there was somebody I was talking to, uh who was not happy that I made this film, and was, literally was like, why are you even doing this?
Oh,
Because,
interesting.
and this is, another white person that I was talking to who's, in a law enforcement family and all of that. And like, really, it's my answer was, I care about people. I see the harm that's being caused, to the communities who are most affected. I grew up with, police are our friends. If you have a problem, you call the police. I grew up with, we're, our nation is founded on everybody's created equal. Like, I remember having the discussion in seventh grade. It says all men are created equal, and the teacher being like, well, that's how they talked back then, but they mean everybody. And then realizing in my late teens, early 20s, no, no, they don't mean everybody. And for me, it really goes back to it, uh, like second, third grade, where the elementary school I went to was predominantly black. It was like 75% black, so I was one of the only white students. And then I'm Jewish, and I was going to Hebrew school 3 days a week at a temple in Beverly Hills, which was, wealthy neighborhood. I'm not from Beverly Hills. My parents were school teachers, so we were like middle class, but in this wealthy neighborhood where I was an outsider, and I had the experience of being othered, and I was, bullied, made fun of, all of that. And so I knew what it felt like to be excluded and to have to deal with, like, 3 days a week, I have to be on the defense in some way. And so that minimal experience, uh, it's funny because like our traumas sometimes turn into our survival skills, which turn into our strengths. That experience had me be really compassionate and empathetic towards everybody else I would meet who was experiencing that in some way. And then you magnify that with my, in junior high and high school, my Black friends who were harassed by the police or couldn't go into a store in a mall without being followed around. Or, when I was in college at USC, that was when the Rodney King beating happened in the LA riots. And so it all just like magnifies and amplifies and amplifies. And then you fast forward to, Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown and Eric Gardner and Black Lives Matter movement and everything like really blowing up front and center. um the driving force, it's funny, I've had a lot of time to think about this. It really goes back to me in second grade, but it's set up with all of my experiences and my friends and my family and all of that. And so, it's because I care, because I know on some level what some of that feels like. And then I because I listen, and this is something I teach in conflict resolution, how to listen empathetically to understand another person's lived experience, putting myself in somebody else's shoes. It's like, wow, this like really needs to be fixed. So that's where I've been coming from.
And I also like that you pointed out, you can feel empathetic, but empathetic without action, it
Hmm.
doesn't really do anything. Like I
Yeah.
can feel empathy for many different groups, but if I'm not sitting there and thinking, well, what can I do and what do I see are some ways that I can assist and actively trying to do something, that empathy is just sitting inside. I don't do anything with that.
Hmm.
So I really liked that you stated that. Um, so it sounds like you had almost this awakening, right? Like you realized early on
Hmm.
that there wasn't a lot of difference between how we treat each other when we're deciding to other people. Because I think that's a conscious action that we
Hmm.
do to make ourselves feel a little better in society,
Yeah.
communities, individuals. And seeing that and being able to have that thoughtful processing is not something that everybody has, right?
Hmm.
So I just want to, since you do teach classes on this, I want to just explore that a little bit. How do
Yeah.
you see that as helping individuals when you learn to be just a more empathetic listener and learn how to discover actions that you can do? Have you seen, or and you don't have to necessarily share these.
Hmm.
I'm putting Matthew on the spot here with Spy's question. But have you seen with maybe students or communities where this has really just been like I'm on the right path, I'm doing the right thing?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most profound things is in my when I when I'm facilitating trainings and everything, I teach people, and actually I've done this with couples in relationship coaching, and I've done this on large scales in rooms of 100 and something people. There's a way that I teach people how to listen, and it's listening uh, to get the other person's experience, put myself in their shoes so I can really get why they think the way they do, why they feel the way they do with what they're sharing with me. When we do that exercise, that training, like you can see the walls come down and people connect and everybody's laughing. And I've had it where people have worked together for 15 years, and they're like, oh, I just did this exercise with this person I've worked with for 15 years and I've never felt like I knew them until today. And so when those barriers come down and we connect, like that's community. That's investment in each other, and then we can actually work together to do the things that will benefit all of us, instead of, well, I need to get my stuff done, or I need to take care of me, you take care of you, and it's all like very individualistic. But it breeds collectivism when we're really willing to like sit with another person and be present and listen.
And that is really hard. Even listeners, even as I'm sitting here on the podcast with Matthew, I'm thinking about what's my next
Hmm.
question, which is often what we think about when we are having conversations. We're not really in the conversation. I'm hearing a piece of it. And then
Yep.
I'm like, well, I got to get ready with my message that I want to share because
Right.
it's so important. So even just that skill of listening, that communication skill of actually listening and taking in and sitting. So many of us have, you know, we're just so intent to quickly get out what I need to do.
Hmm.
When you said you did a workshop or you spoke with someone who was like, "Wow, I finally know my colleague. I've known them. I've never known them like this." I was like, I have been the same at places
Hmm.
where we interact. We may have worked together for years, but we actually don't know each other, even if we eat lunch, because I'm not actually listening with intention.
Hmm.
So
Yep.
it is probably one of the things we wish more of our politicians did,
Hmm.
more of our leaders did, just paused and listened to what the people really probably are asking.
Yeah. And it's
Um,
interesting, not, and I'm not asserting any political affiliation, but if you look at the way Joe Biden interacts with people, like he connects with people in a very compassionate, empathetic way. He's been through stuff, and he knows how to empathize, and it's like very different from the previous person, right? And so just looking at it from human connection, again, politics aside and all of that, it's like it plays out like right on the TV in front of us. And that's like for me when I'm seeing how that works inside of organizations, seeing how if people come into communities that are having major issues around safety and punishment and crime and all these other things, when people come in and they're like, yeah, I get it, let's work together and actually make the changes that you need, like not what I think you need, but what you're telling me you need, like then those communities are then supported, and then crime goes down, health increases and all. But there's such an investment politically that now, and economically, I mean, economics is a huge driving force behind the majority of the problems that we have socially. When we take the money out of it and the politics out of it and really invest in one another, people do better.
100%. And as I was listening to that, and you were saying, um, when I don't come in to fix a problem for people and listen to what they need, because oftentimes those who come to assist or when community action projects start, it's not with intention for the communities they're trying to serve. It's,
Hmm.
well, I think you need this versus listening. And then the wonderment is, well, why didn't it work? Like, why
Hmm.
weren't we successful? You didn't have the buy in from the community, there was no voice there. Um, and I'll just mention this briefly. I have a colleague who was doing some instructions in an upstate area, and she realized that everybody who was a facilitator, except for her, was not a person of color.
Hmm.
And they were serving a community that is predominantly brown and black.
Yeah.
And she thought, wow, this is really not serving the needs of the community because everything was made by people who don't live in the community.
Hmm.
And that was a real aha moment because then when programs fail or people don't attend, it's like, well, why didn't it work? Well, you don't have involvement. So I love that you mentioned we have to really shape things for the communities we're trying to interact with if we're coming into those spaces. Now, many times it comes out of the community itself and is grassroots movements,
Yeah.
but the things that tend to be the most funded, if we're talking about economics, are these, and I hate to call them performative actions, but
Hmm.
performative actions where
Yeah.
people get to feel good and go in and say, oh, I did this thing, and then nothing ever comes of it.
Hmm.
So I love that you mentioned real intention to the community. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about, so we talked about, community and how communities can care more, but your film is about um, changing how we think about policing and incarceration.
Hmm.
And the verbiage sometimes gets people, right? Like talking
Yep.
about, well, how do you work towards abolition and what does that look like? Or even words like, and you did not use these words, I'm using these
Hmm.
words. What does it mean to defund police work?
Hmm.
And often I find that anytime those two words, defunding or abolition,
Yeah.
comes into play, we immediately go into, oh, no, 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 no. But if there's systems and information, that can look very different. So I would love if you could talk a little bit about that, a little bit
Yeah.
more about that,
Yeah. Thank
just for
you.
listeners who may not understand the concept.
Sure, and those are, you're right. Those are the terms that come up, and we've been doing community impact screenings across the country, in various cities, and then we'll do panel discussions, and with I'll usually be there with local activists or elected officials or whomever, and pretty much every time somebody asks about, well, what about defund and abolition and excuse me, aren't there other terms, or can't we rephrase it? And and so we go into that, and the reality is, it doesn't matter what those terms are, that the pushback is there's going to be pushback, uh and a big part of that, again, goes back to politics and economics. And we've all been socialized for hundreds of years to believe that we need a lot of police. They're the only ones that are going to keep us safe from, the quote bad people. And so it's just like an automatic thing. Like it's one of those things that, uh, it's like the thing that we don't know that's running the machine. It's like, oh, just call the cops. Like we're supposed to call the cops. Until when I was in one of my classes, and one of my fellow students who's black and from the Midwest said to me, well, black people have been not calling the police for decades. And then they were like, well, you should go read Mariam Kaba's We Do This Till We Free Us. And then we can talk more about like what is defund and abolition, and what are the alternatives. And so Mariam Kaba, who's brilliant, like really lays out, abolition is not, and she clearly says this, it's not get rid of all police and prisons tomorrow. And it's about creating the condition where police and prisons are obsolete, where we don't need them. And several people in the film
Now,
that,
I'm going to play devil's advocate
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
this is conversation style. I am sure when you talk about these things or when you mention this and you quote these people, people will look at you in the audience and go, this guy's nuts.
Mhm.
Like, we can't do that because we don't have systems in place. Like,
Right.
and we're not willing to do
Mhm.
to give you're talking about giving everybody a handout, Matthew.
Right.
Like, is that what you're trying to make us do? Are you trying to make us socialists? Because that's the other word
Right.
that will
Yeah,
often come
socialist,
up.
communist,
Like,
Marxist.
that is
Yeah.
bad. We need to work in this
Mhm.
country. I'm throwing out the words that probably
Yep.
come up. And so, how do you kind of like, because we can go down the path, right?
Mhm.
How do you kind of address that? Because I'm sure that gets people kind of riled up when you start to mention activists and authors
Yeah.
and writers and researchers in the field.
Yeah, well, the beauty of the film is I interviewed 10 people who spoke to this, so I didn't so I didn't have to. And they're experts who have worked in this for decades. So for instance, Dr. L. Jones, who's a professor from Halifax, Nova Scotia, and she's worked in prisons with incarcerated people since she was 14, and her father was an activist. She talks about those very things. She's like, it's not, we invest, most cities invest somewhere around 50% of their budget into police. And Gina Viola, who ran for mayor of Los Angeles on an abolitionist platform, is in the film. And she talks about how in Los Angeles, the budget for LAPD has increased 50% over the last 10 years. Like we're spending LAPD like 3.2, $3.3 billion a year. And then we have the LA County
So we're
Sheriff's
not
Department.
defunding police.
No,
We've
it's
been
going
spending
up.
more. If
Nobody has
so
been defunded.
So if I was a business, if we were
Mhm.
really a business and we were about economics and money, would you continue to fund something that hand over fist every year you spend more for, but you don't see more return on? I'm just curious
Absolutely
from
not. And
as you
that's
say this.
right. Yeah. So, like LA County and City is spending over $7 billion a year on just police. Right. There's
Not
a
including like health access,
no,
health
that's
hospitals, anything
police.
social
No.
services.
Right. And so in the film it's talked about how uh you know the correlation is when communities have the most services and resources, crime is lower. you know
Wait, what?
Beverly.
Stop.
Yeah.
When I have something that I can do where I can maybe get food services, even entertainment,
Hmm.
right? Because that's some of the piece with,
Yep.
some things are, yeah, I have
Hmm.
a teenager, so I know this boredom is
Yeah.
a thing. When you have those systems in place, are you telling me that crime goes down?
Hmm.
Like, if I don't have to steal bread, like Les Mis,
Yep.
will I not it impacts our crime and
Yeah.
the number
Yeah.
of
And
police?
because crime is most closely related to poverty and uh, desperation, you know, uh, mental health, which is all, kind of intertwined. And Hawk Newsom, who's a co-founder of Black Opportunities in New York and Black Lives Matter New York, talks about this in the film. And his organization last summer did a Summer of Hope uh, event where the whole summer, they provided entertainment, like you said, they provided things for kids to do, they provided food. They're always out in the communities. They taught the residents, like if there's a something that needs to be fixed, like a light pole or something, like this is how you report it. And in that summer, gun violence decreased 38% in their section of the Bronx.
So basically, they were doing the things that we think about when we think about community, things that we often correlate with pre-50s, 40s, 30s,
Mhm.
ideas around community and people caring for each other and caring for teenagers and children. They were doing this now. So we are not necessarily changing how society does things. We're almost sort of bringing back some of these ideas, and I don't want to politicize this,
Mhm.
but just some ideas that conservatives are saying perhaps that these movements do not embrace, which is the care of community.
Yeah, I
It
mean,
almost feels like you're telling that story, like we're all on the same page.
mhm. Yeah, and if you want to talk about social programs, like a lot of what Black Opportunities does is based on what the Black Panthers did, in the 60s and 70s, and things as simple as let's feed our kids breakfast in the morning, which came from the Black Panther Party, which then became the federal breakfast program, that was adopted by schools. And then you have conservatives who are like, no, we're not spending money on that, when it's literally like, let's feed our kids, and when they're fed, they show
Which
up better in
churches
school,
and
you know.
communities have been doing for
Yeah.
years. And
Mhm.
so to not embrace the care of, I'm always surprised at how we are so ready to harm others and
Mhm.
do the same programs, but just for other people who are not allowed to participate.
Yeah.
Um, so I love the concept of being more in tune with community. And this is coming
Mhm.
from someone who's autistic and doesn't like to go outside.
Mhm.
So if I
Yeah.
can love the concept of caring for community, I think we can all kind of get behind and embrace that. Are there barriers that you think we could be working on to make this more widespread, and I'm not even going to say just in the US, but like
Mhm.
worldwide concepts or where there maybe are some barriers that are stopping us from doing this.
Yeah, yeah, there are. And it goes back to, you were asking about, when people push back or bring up like the commie Marxist, whatever. And actually, Elle Jones talks about this in the documentary, how she says two things, and I'll bring it back. But, she says, like you said, uh, we're not ready for a world without police and prisons yet, because we don't know how to talk to our neighbors, and we don't know how to, we don't have our strategies to take care of people and reduce harm, because we've been isolated. We've been taught, to be very individualized, and to be taught like, I'm good, you're bad. There's always the othering. And she talks about how, like you were saying, we keep pouring money into police and prisons, and we're not there's not a it's not making us safer. So it's not like she literally says it's not a radical, commie Marxist leftist thing. It's you know it just makes sense that if we invest in the right places, if we really care about people, then we'll invest in people and not in the punishment system. And so the barriers are, as a filmmaker, this is really interesting. The barriers are how we've been socialized. The barriers are how the media has been used for 100 years of film, and however many years of TV, and then before that, with stage shows and performances and all of that, where we've been taught we have punishment is the way. Punishment is the deterrent. If somebody does something bad, they have to suffer the consequences. um, but we don't. But it. But if you look at statistics, if you look at studies, if you look at, and this is spelled out in the film, punishment is not really a deterrent. It breeds more violence. It breeds more. Like if you look at, like in New York, uh, Dr. Jody Armour, who's in the film, talks about the stop and frisk, uh, policies in New York. Like what that does is it breeds resentment between the community and the police. And so people don't want to talk to the police because they're being hassled all the time, or because they're being, stopped all the time, or they're being questioned for just walking down the street. And so the barriers are that we've been socialized in a certain way. We've been programmed in a certain way, and we haven't been taught to be compassionate and empathetic. And so in my conflict resolution work, I always say, like, I was raised with suck it up, just get the job done. My kids were raised with use your voice. Nobody's yet been raised with, oh, this is how we sit and listen and like really connect with another person, because that breeds unity. And then if you look at, like, on the political side, the pushback against critical race theory, which was all made up and not rooted in anything. But then there's like the social emotional learning. I was just watching a video on this where people have been criticizing social emotional learning in schools, saying that that's like the path to, I don't know, Marxism or whatever, when it's really teaching kids like how to be like empathetic and compassionate and care about people. And so when we do, like I was talking about, that listening technique, the barriers come down and people connect. And then people connect, and they are inspired to take action that benefits not just them, but the person sitting across from them. And then it becomes mutually beneficial, which then has a positive effect on the whole. And so it's not like, this isn't like theoretical stuff. This is stuff I've seen work. This is stuff that the people in the film talk about in regards to policing and incarceration. Like, when communities have services, crime goes down, people are do better. Like, I have there Jose Gutierrez is a licensed therapist and social worker, and he talks about how the majority of communities he works with, uh, the mental health issues are caused by the way that people are being policed. And so when that's not there, and community systems are there, uh, people do better.
You know, you mentioned something so important, stress. I think we've all come to realize as a world that stress is dangerous. It impacts our physical health, our mental health, our lifespan. And if we don't learn how to be more empathetic and listeners and pause, because I'll be honest, as a healthcare provider, as a nurse in a hospital, I remember being told the right thing to do is de-escalate patients, to
Mhm.
take the time and to walk them through and to be patient when they are like, when we would have patients in crisis, that we were trying to kind of get back into the treatment plan. But it takes a long time. It takes more effort for
Mhm.
me to talk to you, for me to change my body language, for me to listen with respect and intention, for me to keep space, for me to ask for permission. These are all things that take time.
Mhm.
What often is shown in movies and TV shows is the team comes in, they rush in, they jump you, they throw you in the
Yeah.
bed. We don't de-escalate you. We give you some Haldol. This and
Mhm.
like, just for our listeners, that does not always happen. There are changes going on in medicine. But historically, this is what we've done. And policing is the same way,
Mhm.
right? So they do have people who can de escalate situations, but it takes time to talk to people. It's so much faster if I just come in and grab you up and do it for you instead of waiting for you to come to the path that you need to go down. And
Yeah.
so imagining that constant sense of stress of like, I don't even have choices sometimes in situations I'm in adds a layer of stress and decreases our mental health. So if we don't kind of slow down as people, even the way we work, like I know that I'll see like something up ahead, a traffic stop or something, and I'll think, oh, just clear that thing. Like I
Mhm.
have places to go.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to slow down and not have so many places to go and so many things so that we can all, with mindful intention, do the things that we want to do work wise, play wise, family wise. But it's a lot of rushing. Like you said, your kids were not taught necessarily to sit and listen, but to use their voice. Now we're all using our voice, but none of us have slowed
Mhm.
down. None
Yeah.
of us know how to listen.
Yeah.
It's just a bunch of yelling. So, Matthew, as we come to the end of our time today, which I mean, we could have talked forever about this, and Matthew, the film has just so much power. I would love to learn what can listeners do to help, or where can they see the film, or where can they pick some of your stuff up.
Mhm.
And listeners, by the way, I will have some notes in the notes section where you can find Matthew, but maybe where it's showing, or what your plan for the tour is next, or how to even get you
Yeah.
over to the town if they want to show the film.
Yeah, great. So the film, the website is reimaginingsafetymovie.com. And that has a list of the trailers on the website. There's a list of our upcoming screenings. If you want to host a screening in your community, you can reach me through the website. And basically, it's we've shown the film to almost 1,000 people across the country, with over 40 different organizations have sponsored screenings. And so we'll just keep doing it, and it's really amazing, uh, being in a room full of 100 people talking about positive social change and taking care of people and caring about people. And so reimaginingsafetymovie.com is the website. And then my consulting conflict resolution is matthewsolomonconsulting.com.
Thank you so much, Matthew. This has been just a wonderful episode with you. And I really hope that people go out and take a look at the film, bring the film where it needs to be, reach out to you. You have such a calming manner
Oh, thank you.
about you. And, I am definitely one for recognizing our allies and using that power of privilege to help us have better communities and care. Um, Thank you so much, everyone. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and to check out all of our new stuff. You can find some of that stuff on our links. And we will see you next time.